The wind howled across the Wyoming plains like a wounded animal, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Samuel McKenna pulled his worn coat tighter around his shoulders as he guided his horse through the sagebrush, checking on the scattered cattle that grazed on his modest ranch. At 25, he was already considered peculiar by the folks in the nearest town, some 40 miles east, while other young men his age spent their evenings in saloons, playing cards and courting the daughters of local merchants. Samuel lived alone on his 160 acres, content with the company of his livestock and the vast, empty sky. His father had died when Samuel was 17, leaving behind a legacy of hard work and harder lessons. "Trust no one but yourself, boy," the old man had wheezed on his deathbed, his eyes still carrying the bitterness of being cheated by a business partner years before. "People will smile at your face and steal from your back. Better to be alone than betrayed." His mother had passed 2 years earlier, worn down by the harsh frontier life and the weight of her husband's cynicism. She'd tried to soften her son's heart with gentle words and warm embraces, but her influence had faded like morning dew under the relentless sun of his father's teachings. Samuel had taken those lessons to heart. He'd built his small ranch with his own hands, trading with neighbors only when necessary, keeping his interactions brief and businesslike. The townspeople called him the hermit behind his back, though he knew well enough what they said. When he rode into town for supplies twice a month, conversations would quiet, and curious glances would follow him down the dusty main street. He didn't drink. His father had shown him what liquor could do to a man's judgment and dignity. He didn't gamble. Cards and dice were fool's games that separated desperate men from their last dollar. And he certainly didn't consort with women. The saloon girls with their painted faces and practiced smiles held no appeal for him. He'd never kissed a woman, never held one close, never felt the warmth of feminine affection beyond his mother's maternal care. Some nights, lying alone in his narrow bed, he wondered if this was living or merely existing. But then morning would come, bringing its familiar routines and responsibilities, and such thoughts would scatter like tumbleweeds before the wind. The November sky hung low and gray, pregnant with snow that refused to fall. Samuel had spent the morning moving his small herd closer to the shelter of a rocky outcropping, sensing the storm that was building beyond the horizon. His bones ached with it, the way they always did before bad weather. Another gift from his father, joints that predicted storms better than any almanac. By afternoon, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. Ice crystals formed on his beard, and his horse's breath came in great white plumes. Still, he pushed on, determined to account for every head of cattle. He'd lost 2 calves to wolves the previous winter, and he wouldn't lose more if he could help it. The ranch house, when he finally returned to it as dusk approached, was a simple affair. 2 rooms, one for living and cooking, one for sleeping. He'd built it solid, with thick walls and a good stone fireplace, but it lacked any touches of comfort or beauty. No curtains graced the windows, no pictures adorned the walls. It was shelter, nothing more. Samuel unsaddled his horse in the small barn, his fingers stiff with cold as he worked the leather straps. The animal nickered softly, grateful to be out of the wind. He gave it extra oats, sensing they might both need the strength come morning. Inside, he built up the fire and set a pot of beans to warm, the same meal he'd eaten yesterday. And the day before that, he'd learned to cook only the basics, enough to keep body and soul together. Sometimes he remembered his mother's cornbread, light and sweet with honey, or her apple pie cooling on the windowsill. But those were dangerous memories, soft memories that made a man weak. As he ate his simple supper, the wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters he'd reinforced just last month. Through the window, he could see the first fat snowflakes beginning to fall, dancing in the lamplight before disappearing into the darkness beyond. He cleaned his plate and set it aside, then took down his father's old rifle from above the fireplace. It needed cleaning, though he'd cleaned it just 2 days ago. The ritual soothed him, the familiar weight of the weapon in his hands, the sharp smell of gun oil. His father had taught him to shoot when he was 8 years old, setting up targets behind their old homestead in Missouri. "A man who can't defend what's his won't have it long," his father had said. "Remember that, Samuel. This world takes from the weak and gives to the strong." The rifle gleamed in the firelight when he finished, its brass fittings catching the glow like tiny suns. He hung it back in its place and added another log to the fire. Outside, the wind was becoming a roar, and snow pelted the windows with increasing fury. Samuel knew he should head to bed, get what rest he could before morning brought its challenges. But something kept him in his chair by the fire, a restlessness he couldn't name. Perhaps it was the storm, or perhaps it was the weight of another winter approaching, another season of isolation stretching before him like an endless white plain. He thought of the other ranchers in the valley, most with wives and children to fill their homes with noise and warmth. Jim Patterson had 6 kids now, his place always bustling with activity when Samuel rode past on his way to town. The Hendersons had just welcomed their first grandchild, old Tom's face creasing with joy as he'd shared the news at the general store. But Samuel had chosen his path, or perhaps it had chosen him. He was his father's son, built for solitude and self-reliance. The empty rooms around him were a fortress, not a prison. The silence was peace, not loneliness. Still, as the storm gathered strength outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would test the walls he'd built around himself, both physical and otherwise. He stood, joints protesting after the long day in the saddle, and walked to the window. Snow was falling thick and fast now, already piling against the fence posts. By morning, the world would be transformed, made clean and dangerous in equal measure. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles, cattle to feed, ice to break on the water troughs, paths to clear. But tonight, Samuel McKenna stood at his window and watched the storm descend upon his solitary kingdom, unaware that this was the last night he would spend truly alone. The wind screamed across the plains, and somewhere in that wild sound was a promise, a threat, a destiny approaching on swift wings. But Samuel heard only the storm, saw only the snow, felt only the familiar chill of another Wyoming winter settling over his isolated world. He turned from the window, banked the fire, and headed for his cold bed, where dreams of warmth and companionship would trouble his sleep, as they always did when the storms came calling. The storm hit with a fury that Samuel had never witnessed in his 8 years on the Wyoming plains. He woke to the sound of something crashing against the barn, a sound that shot him upright in bed, heart hammering. Through the frosted window, he could see nothing but a wall of white, snow driven horizontal by winds that must have been pushing 70 miles an hour. He dressed quickly, layering everything he owned, 2 shirts, his heavy coat, the thick gloves his mother had knitted years ago. Even so, when he opened the door, the wind nearly tore it from its hinges. Snowblast hit him like 1,000 tiny needles, stealing his breath and coating his beard with ice in seconds. The cattle! He had to check the cattle. Samuel fought his way to the barn, sometimes crawling when the wind threatened to knock him flat. His horse whinnied in terror, eyes rolling white in the darkness. He soothed the animal as best he could, then grabbed a coil of rope from the wall. His father had taught him this trick in a blizzard. A man could get lost 10 feet from his own door. The rope would be his lifeline. He tied one end to the barn door and the other around his waist, then plunged into the white hell outside. The cattle had been sheltered near the rocks, but as he fought through the snow, his heart sank. The wind had shifted during the night, turning their shelter into a trap. Snow was piling against the rock face, threatening to bury the animals alive. Samuel worked frantically, using a shovel to clear paths, driving the confused and frightened cattle toward the more protected lee side of the formation. His hands went numb despite the gloves, and ice formed on his eyelashes, making it hard to see. One calf was already down, nearly buried. He dug it out and carried it to safety. its mother following with anxious lows. By the time he'd moved the herd, he was exhausted and disoriented. The rope leading back to the barn had disappeared under fresh snow. He found it by feeling along the ground, his fingers barely able to grasp the lifeline. But when he tried to follow it back, he realized with growing horror that it had come loose from his waist. He held a loose end, leading nowhere. The storm had become a living thing, a monster of wind and snow that seemed determined to claim him. He couldn't see the barn, couldn't see the rocks, couldn't even see his own feet. The cold was seeping through his clothes, a deadly numbness creeping up his limbs. Samuel had never prayed much. His father had considered it weakness, but he prayed now, stumbling through the white blindness, searching for anything familiar. His foot caught on something buried in the snow, and he went down hard, the impact driving the breath from his lungs. "Get up," he told himself. "Get up or die." But his body wouldn't respond properly. The cold had its teeth in him now, and he knew with the clarity that comes at such moments that he had perhaps minutes before he couldn't get up at all. He'd seen frozen cattle before, had found men who died in storms like this, peaceful expressions on their faces as if they'd simply gone to sleep. Then was he imagining it? A flicker of orange light through the driving snow. Fire! It couldn't be. There was nothing out here, no neighbors for miles. But there it was again, a dancing glow that appeared and disappeared in the white chaos. Samuel crawled toward it, no longer caring if it was real or a dying man's delusion. His father would have called him a fool, chasing phantoms in a storm. But his father was dead, and Samuel wanted very much to live. The light grew stronger, more definite, not his imagination, real fire, somehow staying lit despite the wind. He stumbled toward it, fell, crawled again. His hands hit something unexpected: buffalo hide, stretched tight, a shelter of some kind, conical, with smoke rising from its peak to be torn away by the wind. A teepee, here, on the edge of his land. Samuel had no strength left to be surprised or cautious. He crawled around the base of the structure until he found the entrance flap. Without hesitation, he pushed through. The warmth hit him like a physical blow. For a moment, he could only lie there on the buffalo robe floor, gasping, as sensation returned to his body in painful waves. The interior was larger than he'd expected, perhaps 15 feet across, with a small fire burning in a ring of stones at the center. Smoke rose neatly through the opening at the top, though wind occasionally sent it swirling. As his eyes adjusted and the ice melted from his lashes, he became aware that he wasn't alone. Two figures sat on the far side of the fire, watching him in silence. Women. Young women with long dark hair and eyes that reflected the firelight like polished obsidian. Indians. Apache, by the look of them. Though Samuel's knowledge of the various tribes was limited to what he'd heard in town, most of it unflattering and probably untrue. The older of the two, perhaps 22 or 23, held a knife loosely in her hand. Not threatening, exactly, but ready. The younger, maybe 18, watched him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Both wore traditional dress decorated with beadwork that caught the firelight. For a long moment, nobody moved. Samuel's mind raced, trying to remember everything his father had told him about Indians. Most of it boiled down to, don't trust them. They'll steal your horses, your cattle, your scalp if you give them half a chance. But these two had built their shelter on his land, or close to it, and he'd stumbled into their space uninvited, which made him the intruder, storm or no storm. His voice came out as a croak. He tried again. "I apologize. The storm. I was lost." The older sister, he could see the resemblance, now said something in Apache to the younger. The younger replied, and Samuel caught what might have been amusement in her tone. "You are the hermit rancher," the older one said in accented but clear English. "We have seen you, always alone." Samuel struggled to sit up, his muscles protesting. "You speak English." "Mission school," she said, and there was something hard in her voice. "Before we left." The younger sister rose gracefully, and dipped a tin cup into a pot near the fire. She approached him carefully, the way one might approach a wounded animal, and offered the cup. The liquid inside steamed, giving off an herbal scent he didn't recognize. "Drink," the older sister commanded. "It will warm you inside." Samuel hesitated. His father's voice echoed in his head. Never take food or drink from strangers, especially Indians. But his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the cup, and the warmth of it was too welcome to refuse. He drank. The tea was bitter but not unpleasant, with an aftertaste of pine and something else, something that seemed to spread heat through his chest and into his limbs. The younger sister returned to her place by the fire, still watching him with those dark, careful eyes. "Thank you," Samuel managed. When the storm breaks, I'll leave." The older sister made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Listen." Samuel listened. The wind hadn't diminished, if anything. It seemed stronger, making the teepee's hide walls ripple and flex. But the structure held firm, the poles creaking but not breaking. "This storm will last 2 days, maybe 3, she said. "You leave now, you die." The younger sister added something in Apache, gesturing at his ice-crusted coat. The older one nodded. "She says you are already half frozen. A fool to be out in such weather." Samuel couldn't argue with that. He'd lived through Wyoming winters. But this storm was something else, something that belonged to an older, wilder world. He looked around the teepee, noting the neat arrangement of belongings, the thick furs, the decorated parfleche bags that likely held food and supplies. These women knew how to survive. "I can pay," he said awkwardly. "For the shelter, I have money back at my ranch." Now both sisters made that sound definitely laughter. The older one shook her head. "We do not want your money, hermit rancher, but you will share our fire until the storm passes. It is the way." She set aside her knife, apparently deciding he posed no immediate threat. The younger sister pulled a buffalo robe from a pile and offered it to him. Samuel wrapped it around himself gratefully, feeling warmth begin to seep into his bones. "I'm Samuel," he said, feeling it was only proper to introduce himself. "Samuel McKenna." "I am Mary Singer," the older sister said, and Samuel was surprised by the Christian name. "This is my sister, Catherine." Catherine smiled slightly at the sound of her name, the first real expression he'd seen from her beyond watchfulness. "Mission names," Mary explained, reading his surprise. "Our true names are not for outsiders." Samuel nodded, understanding. He'd given them something. They'd given him something of equal value. Fair trade. As the fire crackled and the storm raged outside, Samuel found himself in the strangest situation of his adult life. He was sharing a shelter with 2 Apache women, drinking their tea, warming himself by their fire. Everything his father had taught him said this was dangerous, foolish, probably fatal. But his father had never been caught in a storm like this, had never felt the cold hand of death on his shoulder, and then been pulled back to life by unexpected kindness. "Rest," Mary said, settling back against a willow backrest. "You are safe here." Safe, with Indians. His father would be spinning in his grave. But as exhaustion overtook him and the warmth of the fire and tea worked their magic, Samuel found he didn't care. He was alive, and that was enough for now. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the world. But inside the teepee, there was warmth, and for the first time in longer than he could remember. Samuel McKenna was not alone. Samuel woke gradually, disoriented by the unfamiliar sounds and smells around him. The storm still raged outside, but the teepee held steady, its buffalo hide walls breathing gently with the wind. The fire had burned low, casting dancing shadows across the interior. He sat up slowly, the buffalo robe sliding from his shoulders. His clothes had dried while he slept, though they still smelled of snow and sweat. Across the fire, Mary Singer sat working on something with her hands beadwork. He realized, watching her fingers move with practiced precision. Catherine was nowhere to be seen. "Your sister?" he asked, his voice rough from sleep. Mary didn't look up from her work. "Checking our horses. They are sheltered in the draw behind those rocks you know so well." So they'd been watching him, knew his land, his routines. The thought should have alarmed him, but somehow it didn't. These women were survivors. Like him, of course they'd studied their surroundings. Mark the rancher who lived alone nearby. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 3 weeks. Mary held up the beadwork, a strip of hide decorated with an intricate pattern of blue and white beads. "We move when we must. The army does not look for 2 women traveling alone." Her voice carried a bitter edge. "They look for war parties, for men with rifles, not for sisters making their way quietly." The entrance flap lifted, and Catherine ducked inside, bringing a swirl of snow with her. She shook herself like a dog, ice crystals flying from her heavy blanket. She said something rapid in Apache to Mary, who frowned. "The horses are well?" Mary asked in English, glancing at Samuel. Catherine nodded, then moved to the fire, holding her hands over the coals. She looked at Samuel with those direct dark eyes and said something else in Apache. "She says you talk in your sleep," Mary translated, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Calling for your mother." Samuel felt heat rise to his face. The cold. I was confused." Catherine made a soft sound and went to the pot by the fire. She ladled something into a wooden bowl and offered it to him. Stew, by the smell of it, with chunks of meat and wild roots he didn't recognize. "Eat," Mary said. "You need strength." The stew was good, better than anything he'd cooked for himself in months. The meat was tender, probably rabbit, seasoned with herbs that gave it a complex flavor. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware of both women watching him. "You live alone," Mary said. It wasn't a question. "No wife, no family." "My parents are dead." "No brothers, sisters?" "None." Catherine said something that sounded sympathetic. Mary nodded. "She says that is very sad. Family is everything." "You have each other," Samuel pointed out. "Yes." Mary's fingers paused in their beadwork. "We had others, parents, 2 brothers, all gone now." The way she said it, matter of fact but with weight behind the words, told him not to pursue it. He understood. Some stories were too heavy to share with strangers. "Your English is very good," he said instead. 4 years at the mission school in San Carlos." Mary's mouth twisted. "They tried to make us forget who we are, cut our hair, forbid our language, dress us like white women. They said it was for our own good. But you left." "We escaped." She looked at him steadily. "They would have married us off to Christian Indians, men chosen by the missionaries, made us into proper wives for farmers." She gestured around the teepee. "This is better, harder, but better." Catherine added something, gesturing expressively. Mary almost smiled. "She says at least here we can choose our own path, even if that path is difficult." Samuel finished his stew, thinking about paths and choices. His own path had seemed so clear, so inevitable. Follow his father's teachings, trust no one, live alone. But sitting here in the warmth of the teepee, sharing food with these remarkable women, he wondered if he'd chosen that path or simply failed to see any others. "You could have let me freeze," he said quietly. "Easier for you. No risk." Mary set aside her beadwork and looked at him fully for the first time. She was beautiful, he realized with a start. Not in the way of the painted women in town, but in something deeper, the strength in her bearing, the intelligence in her eyes, the way she held herself with quiet dignity despite everything she'd endured. "A person in need is a person in need," she said simply. "White, Apache, Mexican, the storm does not care. Neither do we." Catherine rose and went to one of the parfleche bags, pulling out what looked like a deck of playing cards. She said something to Mary with a mischievous smile. "She wants to know if you play cards," Mary translated. She learned from soldiers at the fort, before we left. I don't gamble, Samuel said automatically. No gambling, just playing, to pass time. Catherine sat cross-legged across from him, shuffling the worn cards with surprising skill. She dealt 3 hands and began explaining the game in a mixture of Apache, gestures, and the few English words she knew. Mary watched with amusement, occasionally translating when her sister got too enthusiastic. It was a simple game, something like rummy, and Samuel found himself relaxing as they played. Catherine was competitive, making triumphant sounds when she won a hand and pouting dramatically when she lost. Mary joined in after a while, her style more strategic, watching the cards carefully. "You learn quickly," Mary observed as Samuel won his 3rd hand in a row. "Numbers make sense to me," he admitted. "Always have. A useful skill for a rancher. And for survival." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Yes, but numbers cannot keep you warm at night, cannot share your burdens or celebrate your joys." Samuel felt that heat in his face again. "I manage well enough." Catherine said something that made Mary laugh, a real laugh, not the bitter sound from before. "She says you are like a bear, hiding in your cave, but even bears seek company in spring." "Is that what I am, a bear?" "Perhaps," Mary said, her eyes dancing with humor. "A very polite bear who says please and thank you." They played cards until the gray light outside deepened toward evening. The storm showed no signs of weakening. If anything, the wind seemed stronger, making the teepee poles creak and groan. But inside, it was warm and comfortable, and Samuel found himself in no hurry for it to end. Catherine prepared another meal, this time a kind of flat bread cooked on hot stones near the fire. She showed Samuel how to tear off pieces and use them to scoop up beans from a shared pot. The casual intimacy of the gesture eating from the same vessel, their fingers occasionally brushing, was foreign to him, but not unpleasant. "Tomorrow, if the storm continues, you will help us," Mary announced. "There is work to do." "Of course, whatever you need." "Can you sew?" Samuel blinked. "Sew?" Catherine giggled, actually giggled at his expression. Mary's mouth twitched. "Mending, repairs. Winter is hard on everything." "I can try," Samuel said, though his experience with needle and thread was limited to rough repairs on his own clothes. "Good. Everyone must contribute." As the evening wore on, Samuel found himself studying the 2 sisters, trying to understand their dynamic. Mary was clearly the leader, the protector, the one who made decisions. But Catherine had her own strength, a quiet resilience and a way of finding joy in small things despite their circumstances. They communicated constantly, sometimes with words, sometimes with just a look or gesture. "You take care of each other," he observed. "Always," Mary said firmly. "Since we were small, our parents taught us sisters must stand together." "Your parents sound wise." "They were." She was quiet for a moment. "They died protecting us. Soldiers came to move our band to the reservation. There was fighting. Our parents made sure we escaped. But," she touched her chest, over her heart, "the cost was high." "I'm sorry." "Do not pity us," she said sharply. "We survive. We are free. That is what matters." Catherine reached over and touched her sister's hand, saying something soft in Apache. Mary's expression gentled. "She reminds me that we have found good fortune too." Mary said, "Kind strangers who help, hidden places to rest, days of sunshine between the storms." "And bears who come in from the cold," Samuel added. "A tempting lightness." Both sisters smiled at that. "Yes," Mary agreed. "Even bears." The wind howled outside, but inside the teepee, there was warmth and companionship and something Samuel couldn't quite name, a feeling like standing at the edge of a cliff, looking out at a vast new landscape he'd never imagined existed. His father had taught him to be alone, but sitting here with Mary and Catherine Singer, sharing food and warmth and cautious conversation. Samuel began to wonder if his father had been wrong about more than just Indians. The storm raged on, but for the first time in his life, Samuel McKenna was grateful for the weather that had driven him from his solitary cave into this unexpected shelter. The second night brought a different kind of intimacy. As darkness settled over the storm-wrapped world outside, the three of them arranged themselves around the fire. Mary had insisted Samuel take a proper sleeping place rather than huddle by the entrance. So now he found himself part of their small circle, the fire crackling between them. Catherine was mending one of their blankets, her needle flashing in the firelight. Mary worked on her beadwork, and Samuel, feeling useless with empty hands, had accepted their offer to teach him basic repairs. His large fingers struggled with a small needle, but both sisters were patient teachers. "You truly have never learned this?" Mary asked, watching him attempt to patch a torn piece of hide. "My mother tried to teach me once," Samuel admitted. "But my father said it was women's work, said I should focus on what mattered: hunting, shooting, breaking horses." "And yet here you sit, learning women's work," Mary observed. "What would your father say?" Samuel considered this, his needle pausing. "He'd say I was going soft, letting my guard down." "Are you letting your guard down?" He looked up to find her watching him intently. "I suppose I am." "Good," Catherine said suddenly, one of her few English words. She smiled at him, then returned to her sewing. "She likes you," Mary said matter-of-factly. "She does not like many people." Samuel felt that familiar heat in his cheeks. "I'm not used to... I don't know how to talk to women. I've never really tried." "You are talking to us now." "That's different. This is... circumstances." Mary set down her beadwork. "Tell me something. Samuel McKenna, have you truly never been with a woman, never held one, kissed one, shared warmth on a cold night?" The question was direct, almost clinical, but not unkind. Samuel found he couldn't meet her eyes. "Never. My father said women made men weak, said they'd smile sweet and then take everything you'd worked for. He'd seen it happen to friends. He said, men ruined by pretty faces and false promises." "Your father was hurt by someone?" Mary said it wasn't a question. "I think so. He never said directly, but there were hints before he met my mother." Catherine had stopped sewing, listening even though she couldn't understand all the words. She said something in Apache to Mary, who translated, "She asks if you are afraid of us." "Should I be?" "Perhaps," Mary said with a slight smile. "We are dangerous women. Ask anyone. Renegade Apaches who refuse to submit to the white man's rules. You don't seem dangerous to me." "Because you see us truly," Mary said softly, "not through the lens of fear and hatred. That is rare." The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling up toward the smoke hole. Outside, the wind had shifted, coming now from the north with renewed force. The temperature was dropping even further. Samuel could feel it despite the fire's warmth. "Tell us about your ranch," Mary said, settling back against her willow backrest. "What is it like, living alone out there?" So Samuel talked, surprising himself with how much he had to say. He described the house he'd built, the satisfaction of raising walls and setting beams with his own hands. He talked about his cattle, how he knew each one by sight, had names for some of them despite knowing better. He described the changing seasons on the plains, the way spring brought wildflowers in colors he had no names for, how autumn turned the grasslands to gold. "It sounds beautiful," Mary said when he paused, "but lonely." "I never thought of it as lonely, just quiet." "There is a difference between solitude and loneliness," she said. "Solitude is a choice, a peace you make with yourself. Loneliness is an emptiness that echoes." Catherine moved closer to the fire, adding small sticks to keep it burning bright. She said something to Mary, gesturing at Samuel. "She wants to know why you never went to the social dances in town. She has seen them through windows, music and laughter and young people courting." I don't dance, Samuel said. Never learned. Another thing your father thought was foolish. He said dancing was just an excuse for improper behavior. Said proper courtship was a business arrangement, finding a woman with a good dowry, from a good family, who could work hard and bear sons. But you never looked for such a woman. No. Samuel focused on his clumsy stitching. I suppose I was afraid he was right, that any woman I chose would prove false, would be after the ranch or the money. Easier to never risk it. And yet you risk your life for cattle in a storm, Mary pointed out. Strange. What we choose to fear and what we choose to face. Catherine rose gracefully and went to her bags, pulling out something wrapped in soft hide. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small wooden flute decorated with carved symbols. She held it out to Samuel. She wants you to try, Mary explained. Music is good for the spirit. Samuel took the flute carefully, aware of its value to them. I don't know how. Catherine sat beside him, closer than propriety would normally allow, and showed him how to hold it, where to place his fingers. Her hands were small and warm as they guided his. She demonstrated a simple melody, the notes sweet and clear despite the storm's howling. Samuel tried to copy her, producing only squeaks and wheezes at first. Both sisters laughed, but not mockingly. Catherine patiently corrected his finger placement, and gradually he managed a few clear notes. Music was forbidden at the mission school, Mary said, watching them. Our music, anyway, they taught us hymns instead. Catherine refused to sing them, so they punished her, made her stand in the cold, took away her meals. Still, she would not sing their songs. Brave, Samuel said, looking at the younger woman with new respect. Stubborn, Mary corrected, but with affection. Like someone else who goes into storms after cattle. They spent the next hour like that, Catherine teaching him simple melodies, while Mary told stories of their childhood carefully edited. He sensed, avoiding the darker chapters. She spoke of learning to track with their father, of gathering plants with their mother, of the games she and Catherine played in the summers before everything changed. We had a brother between us in age, she said quietly. Joseph. They called him at the mission. He had a gift with horses, could gentle the wildest ones just by talking to them. What happened to him? Sickness at the school. Many children died that winter. The missionaries said it was God's will. Her voice went hard. Their God seems to will much suffering for Apache children. Catherine set aside the flute and moved back to her own sleeping place. She said something to Mary that sounded like a question. She asks if you believe in their God, Mary translated. The white man's God who lives in churches and speaks through men in black robes. Samuel considered this. My mother did. She read from the Bible sometimes, when my father wasn't around. But I never saw much evidence of God caring one way or another about what happens down here. We believe differently, Mary said. The spirits are in everything, the wind, the stones, the fire. They do not judge or punish. They simply are, and we must learn to live in harmony with them. That sounds more sensible than most of what I heard in church. Perhaps you are part Apache in your heart, Mary said with a smile. A bear who is learning he is not meant to live alone in his cave. The fire was burning lower now, and Catherine was already wrapped in her blankets, though Samuel could see she was still awake, watching them talk. Mary covered the coals partially, banking them for the night. We should sleep, she said. Tomorrow the storm may break. Samuel nodded, suddenly reluctant for the night to end. In the morning, if the weather cleared, he would return to his ranch, his routine, his solitude. This strange interlude would become just a memory. Thank you, he said quietly. For shelter, for food, for kindness. Mary looked at him across the dying fire. You are welcome here. Samuel McKenna. Remember that. As he settled into his borrowed blankets, Samuel thought about her words. Welcome. When had anyone last made him feel welcome, not tolerated or accepted in a business transaction, but truly welcome? Catherine murmured something that sounded like a good night in Apache. Mary translated automatically. She says sleep well and dream of spring. Tell her I will try. But as sleep took him, Samuel didn't dream of spring. He dreamed of dark eyes reflecting firelight, of gentle hands teaching him music, of voices that welcomed him in from the cold. He dreamed of not being alone, and for the first time in his life, the dream didn't frighten him. The storm continued through the night, but inside the teepee, 3 people slept peacefully, the barriers between them beginning to fall like snow melting in the warmth of an unexpected spring. Dawn came slowly, the light outside the teepee growing from black to gray to pearl. Samuel woke to find the wind had finally died, leaving an enormous silence in its wake. He lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet breathing of the 2 sisters, reluctant to move and break the spell of the past 2 days. But nature called, and responsibility. He rose carefully, trying not to wake the others, and pushed through the entrance flap. The world outside was transformed. Snow lay 3 feet deep in places, higher where the wind had driven drifts against every vertical surface. The sky was clearing, showing patches of pale blue between retreating clouds. His ranch lay somewhere to the east, buried under all that white. His cattle would need feeding, paths would need clearing, water troughs would need the ice broken. The familiar weight of duty settled on his shoulders. When he ducked back inside, both sisters were awake, moving with the quiet efficiency of those accustomed to breaking camp quickly. Mary looked at him, reading his face. "The storm has passed," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I should. I need to check on my stock." Catherine said something in Apache, her tone urgent. Mary shook her head, responding in the same language. They went back and forth for a moment, clearly disagreeing about something. "What is it?" Samuel asked. Mary hesitated. Then, "She thinks we should tell you. I think it is not our secret to share." "Tell me what—" The sisters exchanged another look. "Finally," Mary sighed. "We are not here by chance. Samuel McKenna, we have been watching your ranch, yes, but not just to know our neighbor. We are waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For our brothers, the 2 younger ones. They escaped from the train taking them to Carlisle School 3 weeks ago. We were to meet here, in this area. But the storm—" Samuel felt the implications hit him. Runaway Apache boys, in this weather, with the army surely searching. "They're children." 10 and 12 winters, Mary said quietly. "Strong boys, but still boys." Catherine added something fierce in Apache. Mary translated, "She says they are smart, resourceful. They will have found shelter. The army will be looking." Samuel said, "They always look hard for runaways from the schools." "Yes," Mary's face was grim. "That is why we stay hidden, why we watch, why we wait." Samuel thought of 2 boys, alone in that killing storm. His stomach twisted. 3 weeks, you said, and no word." "None, but we cannot search openly, cannot ask in towns, can only wait and hope." Catherine suddenly stood and began gathering their things, moving with sharp, angry movements. She said something that sounded bitter. "She wants to leave now." Mary explained. "Says we have endangered you enough, that we should not have burdened you with our troubles." "No." The word came out more forcefully than Samuel intended. Both sisters looked at him in surprise. "No, you haven't endangered me, and you're not a burden." He thought quickly. The army might search his ranch, it was logical, checking all the outlying properties. But they'd be looking for hostiles, for warriors, not for 2 women who could pass as Mexican or even mixed-blood settlers if needed. "Stay," he heard himself say. "Not here in the teepee, that's too visible now that the storm's passed, but I have a root cellar behind my house, dug into the hillside. It's hidden, warm enough, and no one knows about it but me." Mary studied his face. "Why would you do this?" Samuel thought about that night of warmth and welcome, about gentle hands teaching him music, about the simple acceptance they'd shown him. Because it's right, because those boys need their sisters, because... He struggled for words. Because you gave me shelter when I needed it. The army won't find anything. I'm just the hermit rancher. Remember, no one expects me to have visitors. Catherine had stopped packing. She looked at him with those intense dark eyes and said something soft in Apache. She says you have a good heart, Mary translated. That the spirits were right to guide you to us. They broke down the teepee with practiced efficiency, Samuel helping where he could. Everything folded down into surprisingly compact bundles that could be loaded on horses. The sisters' mounts were indeed hidden in the draw, as Mary had said, 2 sturdy ponies, thin from winter but alert. The journey to his ranch took twice as long as usual, fighting through the deep snow. Samuel went first, breaking trail, while the sisters followed with their horses. When his buildings came into view, he felt a strange sensation as if he were seeing them through new eyes. The house looked smaller than he remembered, more isolated, more lonely. He showed them the root cellar, dug into the hill behind the house and concealed by a natural fold in the land. His father had built it in the early days, paranoid about Indian raids that never came. It was dry and relatively warm, with stone walls and a sturdy door hidden behind a canvas covered with dirt and snow. It's not much, he said apologetically as they surveyed the space. But it's safe. It is good, Mary said firmly. We have sheltered in worse places. They spent the morning making it habitable, bringing in their bedrolls and supplies. Samuel contributed what he could from his house candles, a small oil lamp, some preserved food. Catherine found the arrangement amusing, pointing out to her sister how their positions had reversed now they were receiving shelter from him. As they worked, Samuel's mind raced with plans. He'd need to be careful, maintain his routines so no one would suspect. He'd have to find ways to bring them news, to help them search for the boys without arousing suspicion. I go to town in 4 days, he said. For supplies, I could ask around, carefully, see if anyone's heard about runaways being caught. Too dangerous, Mary said immediately. If you start asking questions... Not directly, but men talk in the general store, in the feed barn. I could listen. She considered this, then nodded slowly. Be very careful. The army has eyes everywhere. The day was warming, snow beginning to slide from his roof in small avalanches. Soon the roads would be passable. Neighbors would start moving around again, checking on each other after the storm. His isolation, usually so complete, suddenly seemed fragile. I should check my cattle, he said. It would look strange if I didn't. Go, Mary said. We will be fine. But Samuel hesitated at the cellar door. Tonight, I could bring supper, hot food from the house. Catherine smiled and said something to Mary, who actually blushed slightly. She says you are trying to fatten us up like cattle for market. That's not... I didn't mean... She is teasing you, Mary said, her stern expression softening. Yes, we would welcome hot food and company. Samuel felt that warmth in his chest again, stronger now. I'll bring what I have. It won't be fancy. Samuel? Mary stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see flecks of gold in her dark eyes. You are risking much for us. We will not forget. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that would express the confused tumble of feelings in his chest, but words had never been his strength. Instead, he simply nodded and headed out to tend his stock. The cattle had survived, huddled in the shelter of the rocks. He counted heads, broke ice on the water troughs, distributed hay, all the familiar tasks, but nothing felt familiar anymore. He kept thinking about the 2 women hidden on his property, about 2 boys lost somewhere in this white wilderness, about the way his life had cracked open like ice in spring. That evening, he prepared the best meal he could manage: venison stew from meat he'd preserved, biscuits that were only slightly burned, coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. He carried it carefully to the root cellar, nervous as a schoolboy. They ate together by lamplight, the earthen walls around them creating an intimate space. Catherine had decorated the cellar somehow, hanging a blanket here, arranging their few possessions there, making it feel less like a hole in the ground and more like a home. "This is good," Mary said of the stew. "You cook better than you sew." "Low standards," Samuel replied, but he was pleased. They talked carefully around the subject of the boys, but he could see the worry in both sisters' eyes. Every day that passed made it less likely the children had survived, but hope was all they had, so they clung to it. When it came time to leave, Samuel found himself reluctant again. The house waited, empty and cold despite the fire he'd banked in the stove. "Tomorrow," Mary said, reading his hesitation. "You will come tomorrow?" "Yes, every day, if you want." Catherine said something that made Mary smile. "She says the bear is learning he prefers company to his cave." As Samuel walked back to his house through the snow, he thought about bears and caves and the warmth of human companionship. The stars were coming out, brilliant in the clear, cold air, for the first time in years. They didn't seem distant and uncaring. Instead, they seemed to be watching, perhaps even approving, as Samuel McKenna took his first uncertain steps away from the isolation that had defined him for so long. Behind him, hidden in the earth, two Apache sisters prepared for another night of waiting and hoping. And in his house, Samuel sat by his fire and made plans not just for keeping them safe, but for somehow helping them reunite with the boys they loved. It was dangerous, possibly foolish, certainly not what his father would have done. But his father had died alone and bitter. Samuel was beginning to think there might be another way. The days fell into a rhythm that Samuel had never known before. Mornings he would tend his cattle and maintain the pretense of his solitary existence. But as soon as the essential work was done, he would find reasons to visit the root cellar bringing food, news, small comforts he thought might please his hidden guests. A week passed, then two. The snow began to melt in earnest, turning the ranch into a muddy mess but also opening the roads. Samuel made his promised trip to town, ears sharp for any gossip about Apache runaways. He learned to move differently around Mary and Catherine, to read their moods and respect their silences. Mary remained watchful, careful, though she had begun to smile more often. Catherine was warmer, quicker to laugh, though the shadow of worry for her brothers never left her eyes. It was Catherine who began teaching him Apache words, starting with simple things. "Gotcha," she would say, pointing to the coffee he brought. "Pesh," touching the metal cup. Samuel repeated the words clumsily, making both sisters laugh. But he persisted. Language was another wall between them, and he wanted it down. One evening, as they shared another meal in the cellar's warmth, Catherine began teaching him something more complex, how to say thank you properly in Apache. The words twisted his tongue, and his pronunciation sent both sisters into peals of laughter. "You sound like a sick crow," Mary said, wiping tears from her eyes. "Then teach me better," Samuel challenged, surprising himself with a playful tone. Mary moved closer, showing him how to position his tongue, how to shape the sounds. She was patient but exacting, making him repeat the phrase until he got it right. Catherine watched with interest, saying something in Apache that made Mary's cheeks darken. "What did she say?" Samuel asked. "Nothing important." But Catherine, grinning, managed in her broken English. "I say, you good student, she good teacher, maybe teach other things." "Catherine," Mary scolded, but Samuel saw her fighting a smile. These moments of lightness were precious, breaking through the constant tension of their situation. But reality always returned. No word of the boys, no sign of them. The sisters tried to hide their growing despair, but Samuel saw it in the way Mary stared at nothing, in how Catherine's songs grew sadder. 3 weeks after the storm. Samuel was returning from checking his farthest pastures when he saw riders approaching his house. His heart hammered as he recognized the blue uniforms. Army, 4 soldiers, led by a sergeant with hard eyes and a harder mouth. Samuel forced himself to ride in slowly, naturally, like a man with nothing to hide. "Afternoon," he called out, dismounting near his porch. The sergeant nodded curtly. "Mr. McKenna, I'm Sergeant Walsh. We're searching for Apache runaways. 2 boys, 2 young women, escaped from the reservation." "Haven't seen any Apaches," Samuel said truthfully. He hadn't seen any runaways. Mary and Catherine weren't running anymore. They were waiting. "Mind if we look around?" It wasn't really a question. "Go ahead." Samuel kept his voice bored, slightly irritated. "Though I don't know what you expect to find. I'd notice if Indians were camping on my land." The soldiers searched perfunctorily the barn, the house, around the immediate buildings. Samuel's heart nearly stopped when one young private started hiking up the hill, but Walsh called him back. "Kids got romantic notions about tracking Indians," the sergeant said with disgust. "Reads too many dime novels. The Apaches were after wouldn't hide this close to a white settlement." Samuel grunted noncommittally, playing the taciturn rancher they expected. "You be careful, McKenna," Walsh said as they mounted up. "These aren't reservation Indians who've learned to be tame. These are wild ones. The women especially, they say Apache women are worse than the men when cornered." "I'll keep my rifle handy," Samuel said. After they left, he waited a full hour before going to the cellar. The sisters had heard the horses, the voices. They sat in tense silence, hands near their knives. "Soldiers," Samuel confirmed. "They're gone. Didn't find anything." Mary let out a breath. "They will be back, or others will come." "Maybe, but they think you'd never hide near a white man's house." "Smart Apache women would not," Mary said with a bitter smile. "But we are not just Apache anymore. The mission school made us something between, not white, not fully Apache, ghosts." That night, Samuel stayed later than usual. The close call had shaken all of them, reminding them how precarious the situation was. Catherine sat close to her sister, seeking comfort. Without thinking, Samuel reached out and touched Mary's hand where it rested on her knee. She went very still, looking down at his hand covering hers. For a moment, he thought she would pull away. Then, slowly, she turned her hand palm up and interlaced their fingers. "Your hands are rough," she said quietly. "Working hands." "Yours are strong," he replied, feeling the calluses from years of hard living. Catherine said something soft in Apache. Mary didn't translate, but Samuel saw tears gather in her eyes. "What is it?" She says our mother would have liked you, would have said you have a true heart." They sat like that, hands linked, while Catherine began to sing softly in Apache. A lullaby, Samuel thought, or maybe a prayer. The melody was haunting, beautiful, full of longing. When the song ended, Mary squeezed his hand and let go. "You should return to your house. It grows late." But at the door, she stopped him. "Samuel, what we are doing, what is growing between us, it cannot end well. You know this." "I know what my father would say," Samuel replied. "I know what the town would say, what the army would say, but I don't know what I say anymore. I only know that these weeks have been... what? The first time I've felt alive in years." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. "Oh, Samuel, you are going to break my heart." "Or you mine." "Yes," she agreed sadly. "That too." The next morning brought unexpected hope. Samuel was mucking out the barn when he heard a whistle, a meadowlark's call, but wrong for the season. He looked up to see Catherine at the edge of the woods, gesturing urgently. He dropped everything and ran to her. She grabbed his hand, pulling him into the trees. chattering in rapid Apache mixed with English. "Come, come, Mary, say come quick!" They ran through the melting snow to a grove of cottonwoods near the creek. Mary was there, kneeling beside two small figures huddled against a tree trunk. The boys, thin, ragged, feet wrapped in torn blankets, but alive. The older one watched Samuel with suspicious eyes, hand on a rusty knife. The younger one seemed barely conscious, shivering despite the blankets Mary was wrapping around him. "They came this morning," Mary said without looking up. "Saw our tracks, followed them. Smart boys." Her voice broke on the last words. Samuel knelt beside them. The younger boy was burning with fever, his breathing shallow. The older one wasn't much better, though he tried to hide it. "We need to get them inside," Samuel said. "That fever needs attention." "Too dangerous," Mary said. "The soldiers." "Damn the soldiers!" The vehemence in his voice surprised everyone, including himself. "These boys need warmth and medicine. My house, now!" It took all of them to get the boys to the house. The older one, Thomas, Mary told him. His Apache name, unpronounceable to Samuel, tried to walk but collapsed after a few steps. Samuel carried the younger one, James, shocked at how light he was. Inside, they worked together with desperate efficiency. Water heated on the stove, blankets piled on the beds Samuel had never thought would hold anyone but himself. Mary made a tea from herbs in her pouch while Catherine coaxed the boys to drink broth. "How long were they out there?" Samuel asked quietly. "Thomas says 3 days in that last grove. Before that," Mary shook her head. "Weeks of hiding, stealing food where they could, staying ahead of the patrols. They're strong boys, but even the strongest have limits." Samuel rode hard to the nearest neighbor, the Pattersons, 5 miles north. He spun a story about finding 2 Mexican boys lost in the storm, orphans heading to family in Colorado. Mrs. Patterson, good Christian woman that she was, sent back medicine and advice without too many questions. For 3 days, they fought for James's life. The fever raged, and the boy called out in delirium, sometimes in Apache, sometimes in English learned at the school. "Don't cut my hair," he pleaded. "Please, I'll be good. Don't cut my hair." Catherine never left his side, singing the old songs, spooning broth and medicine between his cracked lips. Mary tended Thomas, who was recovering faster but watched everything with those 2 old eyes. Samuel moved between them all, bringing supplies, standing watch, doing whatever was needed. On the second night, as James's fever finally broke, he found Mary crying silently on the porch. "Hey," he said softly, sitting beside her. "He's going to be all right. They both are." "I know." She wiped her face angrily. "I do not cry. But seeing them like this, hearing what they endured..." Samuel put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder as if it belonged there. "You found them," he said. "That's what matters. They're safe now." "For how long?" she asked. "Where can we go that they will not hunt us? How can we live when the whole world says we must not exist as we are?" He didn't have an answer, but sitting there in the darkness, holding this remarkable woman while her siblings slept safely in his house, Samuel made a decision. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Together." She lifted her head to look at him. "You cannot promise that." "Watch me." And there, on his porch under the cold stars, Samuel McKenna kissed Mary Singer for the first time. It was awkward and tender, and everything his father had warned him against. It was also the most perfect moment of his life. When they finally pulled apart, Mary was smiling through her tears. "You foolish man! What have you done?" "Something I should have done weeks ago," he said, and kissed her again. Behind them, visible through the window, Catherine sat vigil over her brothers, love and fierce protection in every line of her body. And Samuel understood with sudden clarity that this fullness, this connection, this complicated and dangerous love, This was what he'd been missing all along. His solitary life was over. Whatever came next, he would face it with these people who had become, impossibly and irrevocably, his family. The peace couldn't last. Samuel knew it even as he watched the boys grow stronger, even as Mary's smiles came easier, even as their strange household found its rhythm. He'd started thinking of them as his family, but the world beyond his ranch had other ideas. It started with looks in town. Samuel had always been the hermit, the odd one. But now people watched him with sharper eyes. Maybe it was the extra supplies he bought. Maybe it was the way he no longer seemed quite so alone. Some indefinable change that made folks suspicious. "Heard you took in some Mexican orphans," Jack Morrison said at the general store, his tone too casual to be innocent. They moved on. Samuel replied, focusing on his supply list. "Headed to family in Colorado, like they planned." "Funny thing," Morrison continued. "Nobody saw them leave. No wagon tracks on the road." "They left early. I'm not their keeper." But Morrison's eyes were calculating, and Samuel knew trouble was brewing. It came 3 days later in the form of Dobbs Hensley and Pete Henderson, local men with too much time and too little character. They showed up at his ranch near sunset, whiskey brave and mean. "McKenna," Dobbs called out, not bothering to dismount at a polite distance. "We need to talk to you." Samuel stepped onto his porch, rifle conspicuously in hand. "State your business and move on. Sun setting." Unfriendly as always. Pete sneered. He'd been drinking longer than Dobbs, swaying slightly in his saddle. "But maybe you got reason to be unfriendly. Maybe you got something to hide." "I've got work to do. Say what you came to say." Dobbs leaned forward. "There's talk in town. Say you're harboring fugitives. Say those weren't no Mexican boys but Apache brats. Say you got their sisters here too." Samuel's face betrayed nothing, but his mind raced. Mary and Catherine were in the cellar with the boys. They'd heard the horses, would be ready to run if needed. But where could they run to? "You believe every drunk's tale you hear in town?" Samuel asked. "Jim Patterson's wife says she gave you medicine for Mexican orphans." Pete said, "But Tom Baker swears he saw Apache ponies in your backwoods last week." Now that's interesting, isn't it? Tom Baker couldn't tell an Apache pony from his own mother. Samuel said, "Get off my land." But Dobbs wasn't done. "See, we think you got yourself some squaws up here, living in sin with savages. That's not just your business. McKenna, that's about the safety of white folks hereabouts." The word squaw made Samuel's finger tighten on the rifle. "I said get off my land." "Or what?" Pete laughed. "You'll shoot us 2 upstanding citizens concerned about our community. That'll look real good to the sheriff." "The sheriff's got no jurisdiction here. This is my property." "For now," Dobbs said meaningfully. "But a man who consorts with hostiles, well, he might find his neighbors less understanding, might find his fences cut, his cattle scattered, might find his barn catching fire some night." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Samuel understood perfectly. These men didn't care about the law or community safety. They wanted him gone, had probably always wanted the hermit gone, and now they had an excuse. "You're drunk," he said finally. "Go home before you do something stupid." "We'll be watching. McKenna," Dobbs promised as they turned their horses. "Us and others. This ain't over." After they left, Samuel waited a full hour before going to the cellar. The family, and that's what they were now. His family sat in tense silence. "You heard?" he asked. Mary nodded. "We bring danger to you. We should leave." "No." "Samuel." "No." He knelt beside her, taking her hands. "We knew this might happen. We talked about what to do." They had talked, late at night when the boys slept. Talked about Mexico, about California, about places where a mixed family might find peace. But talking and doing were different things. "The boys aren't strong enough for hard travel," Catherine said in her improving English. "James still coughs at night. Thomas, the older boy, spoke up. I'm strong. I can travel. His English was good. The mission school's one success. It's my fault. I should not have led them here. You led them to safety, Samuel said firmly. To family. You did right. But the boy's eyes remained troubled. He'd seen too much for his 12 years, carried too much responsibility. We need friends, Mary said quietly. Cannot face this alone. Samuel thought about his neighbors. The Pattersons were good people, but would they risk themselves for Apaches? Tom Baker was already spreading stories. The Hendersons, Pete's family, were poisoned against them. Then he remembered. John Whitman. Mary looked at him questioningly. He ranches about 15 miles south. Lost his son in the war fighting for the Union. He's got no love for the government or those who blindly follow orders. And his wife, she's Mexican. They know what it's like to be outsiders. It was a slim hope, but better than nothing. The next morning, Samuel rode to the Whitman ranch. John was mending fence, his weathered face creasing into surprise at the visit. McKenna, don't see you out this way often. Need to talk to you, John, privately. Something in Samuel's tone must have conveyed the seriousness. John set down his tools and led him to the barn. Samuel told him everything. It was a risk, but instinct said John Whitman was a man who understood complicated truths. When he finished, John was quiet for a long moment. Apache, you say, yes. And you care for them, the woman and her sister. I do. John studied him. My Maria faced hell when we married. Called all kinds of names, threatened, had rocks thrown at her in town. That was 20 years ago. It's some better now, but not much. I know it won't be easy. Easy, John laughed bitterly. Son, it'll be impossible, but impossible things are sometimes worth doing. He paused. What do you need? Relief flooded through Samuel. Information, watch in town, maybe supplies if things get bad. I'll do what I can, but McKenna Dobbs Hensley is mean as a snake and twice as poisonous. And he's got friends. You be careful. Samuel rode back, feeling slightly less alone. One ally wasn't much, but it was a start. The harassment began that night. Riders circled his property line, whooping and firing shots into the air. Not close enough to return fire, just close enough to terrorize. The boys huddled together, trying to be brave, while Catherine sang softly to calm them. Old Apache trick, Mary said with bitter humor. Keep the enemy awake, wear them down. It continued for 3 nights. Samuel barely slept, standing watch, rifle ready. On the 4th day, he found a fence cut and 20 head of cattle missing. The message was clear this was just the beginning. But on the 5th day, unexpected help arrived. Samuel was repairing the fence when he saw riders approaching. He tensed, then relaxed as he recognized John Whitman. But John wasn't alone. With him rode 2 other men Samuel knew by sight, Miguel Esperanza, who ran sheep in the hill country, and, surprisingly, Doc Morrison, Jack Morrison's younger brother. Heard you were having some trouble, John said mildly. Some, Samuel admitted. Well, said Miguel, dismounting. Seems like you could use help with this fence. Many hands. You know. They worked in companionable silence for a while. Then Doc Morrison spoke up. My brother's an ass. McKenna. Always has been. And Dobbs Hensley is worse. Man's got no charity in him. Why are you here? Samuel asked directly. Doc considered. Because I took an oath once, to help folks who need it. And because I remember when my brother and his friends tried to run the Esperanzas out of the valley. Didn't like it then. Don't like it now. Also, Miguel added with a sly smile, my cousin says she saw your woman at the creek. Says she's beautiful. A man would be a fool not to protect such beauty. Samuel felt heat rise to his face. When did... Yesterday dawn. Don't worry, Rosa won't tell. She understands about careful love. They finished the fence as the sun set, as the men prepared to leave. John clasped Samuel's shoulder. You're not alone in this. Remember that. Dobbs and his kind. They're loud, but they're not everybody. There's those of us who believe a man's business is his own, long as he's not hurting anyone. After they left, Samuel found Mary waiting in the barn. She must have been watching from the cellar's hidden ventilation gap. "You have good friends," she said softly. "Apparently more than I knew." She moved into his arms, and they stood there holding each other as darkness fell. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Dobbs wouldn't give up easily, and the army was still searching. The future remained uncertain and dangerous. But tonight, Samuel had allies. Tonight, his family was safe. And tonight, the woman he loved was in his arms, solid and real and worth any fight that came. "We'll make it through this," he whispered into her hair. "Yes," she agreed. "Together." From the house came the sound of Catherine's laughter as she played some game with the boys. Normal sounds of a family evening. Sounds worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth risking everything to preserve. Samuel kissed Mary gently, then walked with her back to the house. Whatever storm was coming, they would weather it. They had no choice. Love had made them brave, and desperation had made them strong. And sometimes, in the harsh land of Wyoming, that was enough. The stars came out, bright and cold, looking down on a ranch that was no longer a hermit's refuge but a fortress of unlikely love. Preparing for the battles ahead. The confrontation came on a morning that promised spring. Samuel was drawing water from the well when he heard horses, many horses. His stomach tightened as he saw not just Dobbs and Pete, but a dozen riders, including some he'd considered neutral neighbors. They'd brought a rope. Mary appeared at his side as if from nowhere, rifle in hand. "I sent Catherine and the boys to the woods," she said quietly. "They know to run if—" She didn't finish, didn't need to. "McKenna," Dobbs called out. Whiskey courage, evident even at this distance. "Time to settle this. You got illegals on your property, hostiles. We're here as concerned citizens to see justice done." "Whose justice?" Samuel called back, his own rifle steady. "The only kind that matters," Pete Henderson sneered. "White man's justice." Samuel heard more horses from the south. His heart sank, more mob members. But as the riders came into view, he saw John Whitman in the lead, with Miguel Esperanza, Doc Morrison, and surprisingly, Jim Patterson and 3 of his grown sons. "Morning, Dobbs," John said pleasantly, positioning his horse between the mob and Samuel's porch. Quite a gathering, someone planning a barn raising. "Stay out of this, Whitman," Dobbs warned. "This ain't your concern." "See, that's where you're wrong." Jim Patterson spoke up. "When armed men gather to threaten my neighbor, that's everyone's concern." Samuel blinked. Patterson had never been particularly friendly, but here he was, sons armed and ready. "He's harboring Apache hostiles," Pete shouted. "Probably the same ones that killed the baker's cow last month." "That was wolves," Doc Morrison said mildly. "I examined the carcass myself, unless Apache have taken to leaving teeth marks." Some men in Dobbs's group shifted uncomfortably. The certainty was wavering. "He's got squaws up there," someone called out. "Living in sin." "I see a woman standing beside a man, both armed to defend their home," Miguel observed. "Nothing sinful in that." Mary stepped forward slightly. "I am Mary Singer," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "Graduate of San Carlos Mission School. I speak 3 languages, can read and write better than most. I harm no one. I ask only to live in peace." "You're Apache," Dobbs spat. "Yes," Mary said simply. "And you are a coward who brings 20 men to threaten 2 people. Which of us brings shame here?" The words hit like a slap. Several riders looked away, suddenly finding their saddle horns fascinating. Then Catherine emerged from the house, not the woods, where she was supposed to be safe. She walked with quiet dignity to stand beside her sister. The boys followed. Thomas trying to look fierce, James holding his brother's hand. Children, someone in the mob muttered. They're just children. Apache children, Dobbs insisted, but his support was crumbling. Jim Patterson dismounted, his sons following suit. Samuel McKenna saved my cattle in the storm 3 winters back, didn't ask for payment, didn't seek thanks, just helped because it was right. He looked at the mob. This man has been our neighbor for 8 years. Never caused trouble, never asked for anything. Now he's found love maybe not the way we choose, but love nonetheless, and we're going to hang him for it. The law, Dobbs started. The law says nothing about who a man can love. Doc Morrison interrupted. I checked. No law against marrying Apache. Discouraged, maybe, but not illegal. Samuel found his voice. I'm not asking anyone to approve, he said. I'm not asking you to invite us to Sunday dinner. All I want is to live in peace on my own land with the family I've chosen. And we'll see he gets that chance, John Whitman said, his hand resting meaningfully on his pistol. The standoff stretched taut. Then, from the back of the mob, Tom Baker spoke up. I got no quarrel with McKenna. Man's always been fair with me. He turned his horse. This ain't right. Dobbs, count me out. Others followed, one by one. The mob dissolved. Men remembering urgent business elsewhere. Soon only Dobbs, Pete, and 3 others remained, facing a larger group of Samuel's defenders. This ain't over, Dobbs promised. Yes, it is, John Whitman said firmly. You'll leave the McKennas alone, or you'll answer to all of us. That's not a threat. Dobbs, that's a promise. After they left, Samuel stood stunned. The McKennas. John had called them the McKennas. Well, Mary said quietly, it seems you have more friends than you knew. Jim Patterson approached, hat in hand. Mrs. McKenna, can I call you that my wife would like to invite you for tea? All of you. The boys could play with our youngest, if you'd be comfortable. Mary's eyes widened. She looked at Samuel, then back at Patterson. We would be honored. As the defenders dispersed, each man shaking Samuel's hand or nodding respectfully to Mary, Doc Morrison lingered. There'll be talk, he warned. This won't stop it all, but most folks would rather gossip than act. You'll find more acceptance than you expect, and less than you hope for. It's a start, Samuel said. Yes, Doc agreed. It's a start. Spring came in earnest over the following weeks. The boys grew stronger, helping with ranch work, their laughter echoing across the pastures. Catherine's English improved daily, and she delighted in teaching Samuel and the boys Apache words in return. Mary and Samuel were married in a quiet ceremony. John Whitman officiated, not legally binding, perhaps, but real in every way that mattered. Catherine sang blessings in Apache while Maria Whitman wept happy tears. The army came once more, but found only Samuel McKenna and his Mexican wife Maria, her sister Catalina, and 2 adopted nephews. Doc Morrison verified the family's health and legal status. The sergeant left frustrated but without recourse. Dobbs Hensley tried one last time to cause trouble, cutting fences and scattering cattle. But this time, Samuel wasn't alone. John Whitman's hands were there to help gather the stock. Miguel Esperanza's nephews mysteriously appeared to help repair fences. Even Jack Morrison, shamed by his brother and wife, sent his own men to stand guard. Dobbs left the valley soon after, seeking easier targets elsewhere. By summer, the McKenna ranch had transformed. A larger house was taking shape, built with help from neighbors who'd discovered that Apache hospitality was as warm as any other. Mary planted a kitchen garden while Catherine taught the Patterson girls beadwork. The boys ran wild with other ranchers' children, becoming just Thomas and James, 2 more kids in the valley's growing tapestry. Samuel stood on his new porch one evening, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. Mary joined him, her hand finding his. No regrets, she asked. He thought of his father's bitter teachings, of the years of loneliness, of the walls he'd built so carefully around his heart. Then he looked at his wife, at her siblings laughing in the yard, at the neighbors who'd become friends, at the life they'd built from love and courage and trust. "No regrets," he said firmly. "Only gratitude." "For what?" "For the storm that brought me to you. For the heart brave enough to let me in. For the chance to learn that my father was wrong. Trust isn't weakness. It's the greatest strength we have." Mary leaned into him, and they watched the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. Somewhere out there, other storms were brewing, other hearts were hiding, other loves were waiting to be discovered. But here, now, on this small ranch where an Apache woman and a hermit rancher had found each other, all was well. The boys called them in for supper: venison stew, Catherine's fry bread, and preserved berries Mary had gathered. A simple meal made rich by the company, by the journey that had brought them together, by the promise of all the days to come. Samuel McKenna had spent years alone in his cave, just as Catherine had teased. But he'd learned the truth that his father never understood, that life begins not in isolation, but in connection, not in safety, but in the courage to trust, not in building walls, but in having the strength to let them fall. As they gathered around the table, Thomas practicing his English grace while James giggled, Catherine humming softly, Mary's hand warm in his, Samuel knew he was exactly where he belonged: home. Thank you all for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale from, whether you're listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps even somewhere out in the wide open spaces that our characters called home. Please subscribe to From Wild West and share your thoughts about Samuel and Mary's journey in the comments below. Your stories and reactions mean the world to us.